Imagine walking through a quiet city park, only to hear two trembling voices whisper, "Please, don't let her hurt us again." What would you do if two little girls, barefoot, bruised, and terrified, clung to you as if you were their last chance at life? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the nightmare two sisters lived through when the one person who should have protected them became their greatest danger. And when a millionaire CEO, still haunted by the daughter he lost, crossed paths with these broken children, his next choice would defy every rule, every system, and even the law itself. What he uncovered was darker than money, deeper than power, and far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Stay with us, because this story will make you question how far one man can go to save two innocent lives. Subscribe now to Silent Lies. The boardroom was filled with noise, voices droning about numbers, charts, and mergers that were supposed to change the future of an empire. But Benjamin Cross, the man at the head of the long polished table, could not hear a single word. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a memory that had sat dormant for years but suddenly clawed its way back into his chest. His fingers toyed with a sealed envelope, the corners bent, the crayon writing fading but still painfully familiar. To Daddy. Don't open till my birthday. Inside that envelope was more than paper. It was the last tether to a little girl who no longer existed in this world. Maddie, his daughter. She had once drawn suns that smiled and swings that seemed to carry her into the sky itself. And in that moment, while his CFO spoke about a $200 million merger, Benjamin felt the weight of that drawing crush him. For the first time in years, he stood, cutting off the meeting mid-sentence. No one dared stop him. No one even spoke. They simply watched their powerful, untouchable leader walk away, silent and unflinching, as if possessed by something larger than profit or reputation. 40 minutes later, he was no longer a CEO in a skyscraper. He was just a man in a heavy wool coat wandering the quiet edges of Lincoln Park. The fountain trickled weakly, its water dark and tired, and the bench beside it felt as though it had been waiting for him. He sat, clutching the card in his pocket, staring at the brittle branches above him. The air bit at his skin, but the cold in his bones came from something else, grief, gnawing and endless. That was when he noticed them. Two small shapes crouched near a lion statue worn down by decades of weather. At first he thought they were shadows, but then one moved, rising cautiously, like a creature that had learned to fear the light. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her jeans were shredded at the knees, her jacket oversized and mismatched, and her long tangled hair framed a face that was far too serious for her age. She stepped forward, placing herself between him and the smaller figure behind her. "Please, mister," she whispered, arms stretched like a human shield. "Don't let her find us." Benjamin blinked. "Who?" That was when the second girl revealed herself. Barefoot, trembling, her little frame wrapped around a crumpled paper bag as though it were gold. She had eyes that did not belong to a 5-year-old, eyes too old, too burdened, too familiar with pain. She lifted her sleeve without a word. The bruise climbing her arm was raw and jagged, a wound no child should carry, and then she spoke, almost inaudible. "She hurts us when we cry." Benjamin's chest caved in. His world shrank until all that existed was that bruise and the two fragile children in front of him. Maddie's face flashed in his mind, her fearless smile, the way she used to believe he could protect her from anything. He had failed her. But maybe he hadn't lost his chance entirely. The older one tugged her sister closer. "We didn't mean to bother you. We were just hiding. We'll go." "No." His voice was harsher than intended. He cleared his throat and tried again, softer, steady. "You're not in trouble. Are you hungry?" They nodded, cautious, still poised to flee. He slipped off his wool coat and draped it over the smaller girl's shoulders. She flinched at first, but then melted into the warmth, her eyes flickering with something fragile a trust. The older one stood firm, suspicion still etched in her expression. "She said we shouldn't talk to strangers." "You're right," Benjamin said quietly, lowering himself to their level. "That's smart. But I'm not here to hurt you, I promise." He hated how weak the words sounded. He wondered how many times promises had been shattered for these children to end up like this. He gestured gently toward the street. "There's a diner a few blocks from here. Pancakes all day. We can sit in the back where no one will bother us. Just for warmth and food, that's all." The older girl hesitated, then glanced at her sister. The younger one gave a tiny nod, as if granting permission. It was enough. They walked together in silence, 3 unlikely figures bound by an invisible thread. Benjamin kept glancing over his shoulder, not at them, but at the world behind them, scanning for threats. His instincts had shifted. He was no longer a man walking home. He was a man guarding something priceless. And then he saw her. Across the street, a woman in a tan trench coat pretended to chat with a vendor, but her eyes swept the park in sharp intervals, searching, hunting. The older girl froze, her small hand clamping onto his coat with desperation. "It's her," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, please, don't let her hurt us again." Benjamin's jaw locked. In that instant, grief crystallized into something harder, sharper. Purpose. He turned his back to the woman and ushered the girls forward, shielding them with his frame. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about mergers or shareholders. He wasn't thinking about loss. He was thinking about survival, about two little girls who had stumbled into his path like ghosts, and who, without realizing it, had just given him a reason to feel alive again. The bell above the diner door chimed as they entered, the warmth and scent of coffee rushing to meet them. Benjamin steered them to a booth tucked away in the corner, his eyes darting to the street one last time before the door closed. Only then did he exhale. The girls slid into the booth, huddling close. Their silence was heavy, filled with unspoken terror. Benjamin signaled for a waitress, his voice firm but gentle. "They're cold and hungry. Hot chocolate, pancakes, and anything else they want." The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a pencil tucked behind her ear, nodded, but she lingered a moment, her gaze drifting to the children's bare feet. She didn't ask questions, she simply disappeared into the kitchen. Benjamin leaned closer to the girls, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "You're safe now," he said. "No one followed us." The younger one cradled the mug of cocoa when it arrived, holding it as if it were a miracle, steam rising to her face. She closed her eyes, savoring the warmth before daring to sip. The older one remained vigilant, her gaze fixed on the window, scanning for shadows. And Benjamin sat there, a man who once negotiated billion-dollar deals, who commanded boardrooms and headlines, feeling utterly powerless. All he could do was watch these children devour pancakes as though they hadn't eaten in days. But as useless as he felt, one truth had already rooted itself deep inside him. He would not abandon them. Not now. Not ever. The diner's booth had become a fragile sanctuary. But Benjamin knew it would not last. The older girl, Leia, never stopped glancing toward the window, her arms still looped protectively around her younger sister. Rosie barely spoke, only tracing patterns in the condensation on her glass. When the pancakes arrived, she devoured them in silence, eyes darting up every time the bell above the door jingled. Benjamin sat close enough to reassure, but not close enough to crowd. He had dealt with powerful men who snapped at the smallest hint of weakness, but he had never seen fear etched so deeply into a child's posture. He leaned forward, voice gentle. "What are your names?" The older girl finally answered, her voice steady but sharp. "I'm Leia. She's Rosie." Benjamin nodded slowly. "I'm Ben." Leia's gaze flicked to the window again, her lips pressing tight. "She'll be looking." "Who?" Benjamin asked, though he already suspected. "The woman," Leia whispered. "In the trench coat. She says she's our guardian, but she lies." Benjamin's chest tightened. He asked softly, "Is she your mother?" "No." Rosie spoke at last, her voice small but fierce. "She hurts us. She locked me in a closet." She shivered at the memory, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. "She said Mom didn't want us anymore." "But that's not true." Benjamin swallowed hard. His instinct was to reach across the table and pull her into his arms, but he held back. He let his hand hover near hers instead, giving her the choice. "You weren't unwanted. You hear me? None of this is your fault." For a moment, something flickered in Leia's eyes, fragile hope, or maybe disbelief. She pulled Rosie closer, as if protecting her from even his words. Benjamin leaned back. He could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, a lifeline to every official channel. Police, social services, child protection. Logic told him to use it, to call, to hand this situation over to the system. That was what any reasonable man would do. But he wasn't sure reason had a place here. He had seen men like Claire Monroe win before. He had seen money twist truth, paper erase blood, signatures silence voices. He could already imagine it. Claire strolling into a courtroom with glossy documents and polished lies, convincing a judge that she was a saint, while these girls were handed back into her arms. Benjamin's stomach turned. He slid his phone back into his pocket without dialing. "We need a new plan," he murmured. Leia narrowed her eyes. Aren't you going to call the police? I will, he said carefully. But not yet. Why not? Benjamin exhaled, forcing himself to be brutally honest. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to help don't, and sometimes they make it worse. Rosie's head snapped up. That's what I told Laya, she whispered. Last time we tried, they sent us back. We told them. We begged them. They gave her more papers, and she laughed. Her voice broke, and Laya rubbed her shoulder fiercely, as if her touch alone could erase the memory. Benjamin felt a chill settle into his bones. This wasn't just about saving 2 children. This was about dismantling a lie so carefully built it had replaced truth. Tell me about your mom, Benjamin said softly. Laya's eyes softened for the first time. Her name is Naomi. Naomi Langston. She used to sing to us at night. She said we were her sunshine. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. One day she got sick, real tired. Then Claire came. She said she would help, but she started hurting us instead. Rosie clutched her stuffed napkin in both fists. Claire said Mom left because we were bad. Benjamin's throat tightened until he could barely breathe. He looked at Rosie, trembling and pale in the corner of a booth, and he heard Maddie's laughter echo from a memory. Maddie, who he had failed to save. Maddie, who never got the chance to grow old enough to whisper for help. No, Benjamin said firmly. You were never bad. Your mom loved you. She still does. The waitress returned then, refilling their mugs, her brow furrowed with quiet concern. She leaned down, lowering her voice. Not to alarm you, she said cautiously, but there's a woman outside asking about 2 missing girls, claims she's their aunt. Benjamin's blood went cold. What does she look like? He asked tightly. Tan coat, blonde, expensive shoes. Laya dove beneath the table, clutching Rosie. Panic rippled through her voice. It's her. Benjamin stood immediately, towering but controlled. He turned to the waitress, his voice sharp but calm. Do me a favor. Tell her you haven't seen them. Just buy me a minute. The woman hesitated, then nodded. You got it. Benjamin ducked back down, crouching beside the girls. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. We're leaving through the kitchen now. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. They just followed him. The swinging doors burst open, revealing the narrow chaos of the kitchen. The cook barely looked up as Benjamin guided the girls through the steam and clatter, his hand steady on Laya's shoulder, his eyes sharp for exits. They slipped through the back door into the icy alley. The wind bit harder now, but the cold was nothing compared to the fire burning in his chest. He didn't know where they were going yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Claire Monroe would not take them back. Not now. Not ever. The city swallowed them as they disappeared down a side street, 3 shadows against the blur of traffic and neon. Benjamin exhaled, the tension in his chest unyielding. He didn't know these girls an hour ago, but somehow, in the span of a breakfast booth and a whispered plea, they had become his responsibility. And for the first time since Maddie died, Benjamin Cross felt alive not because he was saving himself, but because he was saving someone else. The motel smelled of bleach and stale smoke, but Benjamin didn't care. It was anonymous, cheap, the kind of place where no one asked questions as long as the bills were paid in cash. He stood at the front desk, hood pulled low, tapping his fingers against the counter as the clerk slid a key card toward him. Room 208. 2 beds. No cameras in the hall. Perfect. He turned back to where the girls stood near the vending machines. Rosie had wrapped one of the motel towels around her shoulders like a cape. Laya's eyes darted to every corner, scanning for danger, her small frame taut with vigilance. They walked together down the dim hallway, the carpet frayed, the lights buzzing overhead. Inside the room, Benjamin immediately pulled the curtains shut. He set down a grocery bag filled with juice boxes, fruit cups, cereal bars, things he'd grabbed on impulse. He hadn't planned on buying stuffed animals, but when he'd seen Rosie freeze in front of the toy aisle, he couldn't stop himself. Now they sat on the dresser, waiting for someone to claim them. This is just for tonight, he said softly, crouching to meet their eyes. Tomorrow, we figure out the next step. Laya pulled Rosie onto the bed, tucking the blanket tightly around both of them. Her voice was quiet, but firm. We won't be any trouble. Promise. Benjamin crouched by the small fridge, handing Rosie a bottle of water. Her fingers trembled as she clutched it. I don't care about trouble, he said. I care about you being safe. The TV flickered on, just enough noise to drown the silence. Benjamin sat on the other bed, shoes still on, elbows on his knees. He watched the girls, their thin bodies curled together, their eyes wide even as exhaustion dragged them down. When a garbage truck roared past outside, Rosie flinched violently, burying her face in her sister's shoulder. Laya barely reacted, too accustomed to fear to notice anymore. Benjamin clenched his jaw. He had sat in meetings where grown men cried over financial losses smaller than the weight these children carried every day. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, stared at the screen. He could call the police. He could call child services. But then he looked at Laya. She was watching him, her body tensed, ready to run if he made the wrong move. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. Then, after a long pause, nodded once. "Good," Benjamin said, "because I'm going to find out where your mom is." Her eyes flickered, almost disbelieving. "You believe us?" "I do." Silence hung heavy in the room. Rosie was nearly asleep, tucked against her sister's chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Laya's voice was a whisper, trembling but brave. "Claire said Mom didn't want us anymore, that she left because we were too much." Benjamin's heart splintered. He stood abruptly and crossed to the window, pulling the curtain back just a sliver. The parking lot outside was empty except for a flickering light and a dented sedan. He exhaled slowly. "That's not true. She didn't leave you. Someone made sure she couldn't come back." Laya's lip quivered. "Are you going to help us find her?" "Yes," Benjamin said without hesitation. "She never stopped loving you. Someone just took her away." For the first time, Laya's shoulders eased. She led Rosie back under the covers, pulling the blanket high. When she reached for her sister's hand, Benjamin noticed something small but monumental. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. That night, after the girls finally slept, Benjamin sat by the window with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. He called in every favor he had left. Investigators, lawyers, doctors, anyone who still answered his calls. By dawn, he had something concrete: Naomi Langston. Institutionalized at Ashgrove Psychiatric Center 2 months earlier, the guardianship papers signed by Claire Monroe had stripped her of every right, and worse, official records listed her as having no known children. Benjamin stared at the file until his eyes burned. This wasn't negligence. It was erasure. Claire hadn't just lied, she had buried Naomi under paperwork, signatures, and silence. His fists clenched so tightly the screen blurred. He thought of Rosie whispering about closets, of Laya's sharp little voice insisting her mom loved her. He thought of Maddie, who never got the chance to whisper anything again. A faint sound behind him pulled him from his thoughts. Laya stood in the bathroom doorway, barefoot, the motel blanket wrapped around her like armor. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just thinking." Benjamin rose slowly, kneeling until they were eye level. "What about?" She stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Finally, she whispered, "If Mom's alive, why didn't she come for us?" Benjamin's throat tightened. "Because someone didn't let her. Someone made sure she couldn't." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "You'll help us find her?" "Yes," he said again. His voice didn't waver. Her lip trembled once, then steadied. "So she didn't leave us?" "No, sweetheart. She never left you." Laya blinked quickly, then walked back to bed, climbing in beside her sister. She didn't speak again, but Benjamin saw it the smallest flicker of belief. He sat back at the window, watching the night bleed into dawn. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He wasn't thinking about grief like a chain around his neck. He was thinking about 2 little girls who needed to believe someone still loved them. About a mother locked away in a room who had been silenced into absence. And he was thinking about what it meant to be needed again. The drive out of Chicago was long and gray, the kind of journey where the city slowly gave way to barren fields and empty roads that seemed forgotten by time. Benjamin gripped the wheel tighter with every mile. Beside him, the GPS stuttered, service fading in and out until all that remained was the sound of the tires chewing gravel. 2 hours from the skyline, the facility emerged from the woods like a Scar Ashgrove Psychiatric Center. Cold concrete walls, narrow windows that barely let in light, a gate that buzzed open with mechanical reluctance. The air itself felt heavier here, as though hope had been vacuumed out long before. Benjamin squared his shoulders as he stepped inside, the weight of a forged authority in his coat pocket. He wasn't here as a businessman anymore. He was here as a man with something to lose and something to win back. A nurse at the desk eyed him suspiciously. "Visits are by appointment only." Benjamin slid the folded papers across the counter. "Authorization. Medical power of attorney pending transfer." His voice was low, sharp, leaving no room for hesitation. The nurse hesitated, fingers hovering over the phone, then dialed. After a clipped conversation, She set down the receiver and handed him a clipboard. Room 312. She doesn't get visitors. The elevator creaked upward, humming with a mechanical fatigue that matched the hollow silence pressing in. When the doors opened, Benjamin walked past rows of closed doors, heart monitors beeping faintly in the distance. Each step carried the weight of years lost, voices silenced, children left behind. Room 312 was at the end of the hall. He knocked once and stepped inside. The room was dim, curtains drawn tight, furniture sparse. In the corner sat a woman so small and fragile she seemed almost part of the chair itself. Naomi Langston. Her hair was longer now, tangled and thin, her eyes dulled to glass. She stared out the window as though the world beyond no longer belonged to her. Benjamin approached slowly, crouching down so his voice wouldn't startle her. Naomi? Her head turned with painful slowness, her lips parted, dry and hesitant. Do I know you? No, Benjamin said softly. But I know your daughters, Laya and Rosie. The change was instant. Her entire body stiffened. Her hands gripped the chair arms so tightly the veins stood out against her skin. The girls? Benjamin nodded. They're safe. They've been looking for you. For a heartbeat, Naomi's expression was nothing but disbelief, as though her mind refused to accept the possibility. Then tears welled, spilling over silently as her lips trembled. I thought I dreamed them. Sometimes I hear their voices. Sometimes I smell Rosie's hair. I thought... She broke off, shaking her head. It's not a dream, Benjamin said. His tone carried an edge, not of anger at her, but at the injustice that had buried her alive. They ran from Claire. They found me, and I promised them I'd find you. Naomi's tears came harder now, but her voice was brittle with fury. Claire said I was unstable. She told me I wasn't safe to be their mother. She said she would keep them until I got better. But then she stopped calling. I begged for updates. I asked every week. They told me nothing. They told me... She choked on the words. They told me I was too dangerous to know if my children were even alive. Benjamin leaned closer, lowering his voice like a blade. She lied. She didn't just take your girls, she erased you from the system. Naomi broke then, her shoulders curling inward as sobs racked her frail frame. Benjamin didn't touch her. He let her grieve, let her body release months of silence. Finally, when her sobs quieted, she whispered, Are they really okay? They're scared. They're hurting, Benjamin admitted. But they're alive, and they miss you. Naomi clutched a crumpled tissue like it was life itself. Laya always tried to be strong. Rosie still sucks her thumb when she sleeps. God, I should have fought harder. No, Benjamin said firmly. You were drugged, cornered, powerless. But you're not powerless anymore. She turned to him then, truly looking at him for the first time. Who are you? Benjamin's voice softened. Just a man who lost a child, and I won't let it happen again. When he opened the curtain, a sliver, gray daylight spilled into the room, sharp and merciless. Naomi flinched, then reached beneath her seat cushion, pulling out a folded photo. They let me keep this, just this. He took it gently. Leia on a swing, arms raised like she could fly, Rosie smiling wide beneath her. Naomi behind them, hair wild in the wind. Benjamin's throat closed. Laya's smile. It looks exactly the same. Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth, sobbing again. By that evening, Benjamin had bulldozed through policy and resistance, throwing legal firepower into the director's office until there was no choice but compliance. Naomi was released into his custody, her few belonging slippers, a comb, the faded photograph stuffed into a bag. As he guided her out, she paused at the doorway, trembling. Are you sure they want to see me? Benjamin looked her straight in the eyes. They've been waiting every day. Hours later, back at the lake house, the reunion broke open like a dam. Rosie shrieked, running into her mother's arms. Leia followed, fierce and desperate, nearly knocking Naomi to the ground as she clung to her. Naomi sobbed openly, clutching both daughters, kissing their hair, whispering their names over and over as though repeating them could reclaim the lost time. Benjamin turned away, his throat tight, giving them the moment that belonged to them alone. But as he stood in the kitchen, listening to the sound of 3 voices braided together again, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just rescue, this was resurrection. The lake house glowed with paper lanterns that evening. Rosie humming softly as she colored, Leia sketching on the rug. Naomi curled on the couch with her daughters pressed against her sides. Peace hung in the air, fragile but real. But Benjamin knew peace would not last. Not with Claire still out there. Not with papers and courts waiting to be manipulated again. And as he sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, he promised himself one thing whatever storm came next. He would build a wall so high around this family that no one could tear it down again. The courthouse loomed like a fortress of stone and indifference, its towering columns casting shadows across the steps. Benjamin had faced boardrooms filled with ruthless billionaires and stood before congressional panels, but nothing carried the weight of this moment. Today was not about markets or mergers. It was about two little girls who had whispered for help in a park and a mother who had been silenced for far too long. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed above polished floors. Naomi walked beside him, shoulders squared but trembling hands folded tightly in her lap. The color had returned to her cheeks over the past weeks, her voice steadier, but this was different. This was not recovery. This was war. Laya and Rosie were not in the courtroom. They were safe at the lake house with Teresa and a security team Benjamin had quietly arranged. He wanted them far from Claire's gaze. He knew the scars she left on them weren't only skin deep, and today wasn't the day to reopen those wounds. When Claire Monroe entered, she did so with the swagger of a woman who had never heard the word no. Flanked by two lawyers in tailored suits, her hair gleamed under the harsh lights, her trench coat immaculate. She looked at Naomi only once, lips curving into a smile that was more threat than greeting. Naomi didn't blink. Judge Ortega, silver-haired and stern, took the bench. The gavel cracked. "Let's begin." Claire's lawyer started first, weaving a polished story dripping with false compassion. He painted Claire as a selfless guardian who had stepped in when Naomi collapsed under the weight of her own instability. She rescued two abandoned children, he said solemnly, providing shelter, stability, and love when their mother, tragically, could not. Benjamin felt Naomi flinch beside him, but she held her composure, jaw tightening. The attorney went further. "Mrs. Langston has a history of psychiatric illness. She misused prescription drugs. She was unfit, unsafe. Claire Monroe did what no one else would. She gave those children a home." Benjamin leaned toward Naomi, whispering low, "They're using everything they have. That means they're afraid." When it was their turn, Benjamin rose first. He didn't need theatrics. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who had nothing to provenly truth to speak. He told the court about the park, about two little girls barefoot in the cold, hiding behind a statue, about the bruise that darkened Rosie's arm, about the way they whispered, "Please don't let her hurt us again." He described the diner, the motel, the nights spent reassuring them they weren't unwanted. He spoke of their terror when Claire's name was mentioned. He laid photographs on the evidence table, a pediatrician's report, a sworn statement from a forensic psychologist. Each piece another crack in Claire's carefully polished facade. Then Naomi took the stand. She stood slowly, her frame trembling but her voice steady as it filled the room. "I want to tell the truth," she began, "and I want my daughters to know they were never forgotten." She told them about her illness, show exhaustion and despair had left her vulnerable, how Claire offered help when she had no one, how she signed papers she barely understood while medicated, trusting someone she believed was family. Her voice shook as she described the silence that followed. Letters returned unopened, phone calls unanswered, weeks of begging for updates until even the nurses stopped responding. "They told me it was better this way," she said, tears streaking her face. "But the danger wasn't me. The danger was trusting the wrong person." Claire's lawyer objected, calling it speculation. Judge Ortega's hand sliced the air. "Overruled. Continue." Naomi lifted her chin. Her voice cracked but carried a power that silenced the room. "If I am broken, it is because someone tried to silence a mother's love. But I am still standing, and I am standing for my daughters." The courtroom fell into stillness so complete. Even the court reporter paused. Claire's smirk faded. Her arms crossed, her jaw tightened. Benjamin rose again, holding one of Rosie's drawings for the court to see. 3 stick figures stood beneath the sun with a smiling face. One tall, broad figure in a blue suit, 2 small girls with bows in their hair, and above the house, a heart. "This is how they see the world now," Benjamin said. His voice was firm, unshakable. Not because of wealth or power, but because of hope. Because they believed someone would listen when they whispered for help. They survived because of the memory of their mother and the courage to trust a stranger who didn't walk away. Claire's attorney seized the moment for his final attack. "Cross," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "You are a billionaire CEO. These are not your children. Why risk your reputation, your fortune, your life, for a family that isn't yours? Benjamin turned to face him. Then the judge, then the jury. His eyes burned with something rawer than anger truth. Because someone had to, he said. Because I lost a daughter of my own, and when I met those girls I realized I had been breathing but not living. They woke me up, and I am not leaving them behind. Naomi was trembling by the end, but it was not fear that shook her, it was the power of being believed. Judge Ortega recessed for an hour. The courtroom emptied, leaving Benjamin and Naomi side by side on a hard wooden bench in the hallway. Naomi whispered, "I thought the hardest part would be seeing Claire again, but it's harder remembering who I used to be, the woman who sang lullabies, the mother who knew how to fight." Benjamin looked at her, his voice low and steady. "You didn't forget. You were silenced. But today you found your voice again." When the court reconvened, the shift was palpable. Judge Ortega wasted no time. Her voice rang clear, unyielding. "This court recognizes that guardianship was obtained under deceptive and unethical circumstances. Effective immediately, full custody of Laya and Rosie Langston is returned to their biological mother, Naomi Langston. Furthermore, legal protective status is granted to Mr. Benjamin Cross for ongoing support and advocacy during the transitional period." Naomi gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Benjamin closed his eyes for a moment, letting the verdict sink deep into his chest. Claire sat frozen, blinking in disbelief as if the foundation beneath her had crumbled. Judge Ortega turned to her, voice colder now. "Ms. Monroe, you are fortunate I am not forwarding this case to criminal court. But hear me welcome within 50 feet of those girls again, and I will reconsider." Naomi wept openly, shaking her head in disbelief. She turned to Benjamin, whispering, "I thought I'd never bloom again." Benjamin rose, extending his arm to her. "Then let's bloom together." As they stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions hurled. But Benjamin raised a hand. "Not today." This moment was not for headlines. It was theirs. Naomi clutched Rosie's drawing in her hand, the one where the son had a smiling face and their family stood beneath it. She held it close to her chest, as though it was a shield against the world. For the first time, they were not fighting alone, and they would never fight alone again. The lake house had always been quiet, designed for solitude, a retreat Benjamin once used to impress investors. But now, weeks after the courtroom victory, it thrummed with something far richer life. Dishes clinked in the kitchen. Rosie hummed to her stuffed bear while coloring at the table. Laya's laugh drifted from the hallway as she helped Naomi string paper lanterns across the fireplace. Benjamin stood in the entryway, arms full of supplies, new bedding, a watercolor set Naomi had mentioned, books with spines begging to be bent. He paused, watching unseen, as if afraid that one sound might shatter the fragile miracle unfolding before him. Naomi had flour dusting her cheek. Laya was barefoot, one sock tucked into the other. Rosie's tongue peeked between her lips as she drew. It was so ordinary, and yet it was everything. It had been only 2 weeks since the judge returned custody to Naomi, stripping Claire of her false power. Claire had vanished from the city's elite circles, her name a whisper in legal backrooms. Benjamin's lawyers were still dismantling the fraudulent web she left behind, but the girls no longer cared. For them, the war was over. Pancakes were real again. Lullabies belonged to their mother. The world was warm. Naomi was healing too. Her movements had regained steadiness, her laughter lighter, her nights no longer fractured by fear. She even hummed while alphabetizing the pantry, something she hadn't done in years. The small rituals of living returned piece by piece, like flowers forcing their way through frost. That morning, as cinnamon rolls baked, Naomi handed Benjamin a mug of coffee, their fingers brushing for a heartbeat too long. "Laya made the frosting," she teased. "So if it's too sweet, extra sugar means extra love," Laya declared from the table, grinning proudly. Rosie held up her drawing. 4 stick figures beneath a house, one with long brown hair wearing a sunshine crown, 2 smaller ones with pink bows, a tall figure in a blue tie. Over the roof, a heart. She had written, "Our house, our happy." Benjamin blinked back the sting in his eyes. He had faced down predators in suits and dictators in boardrooms, but nothing had ever undone him the way a child's crayon could. Later that afternoon, while Naomi napped and Rosie dozed on the couch with a book across her chest, Laya wandered into the study. Benjamin was assembling a small desk for her art supplies. She leaned in the doorway, quiet at first, before asking, "Were you always this kind?" He looked up, caught off guard. No, not always. What changed? Benjamin set down his tools, wiping his hands on a cloth. I think losing my daughter made me shut everything down. I was afraid of feeling again, afraid of being broken twice. He glanced at her. Then you and Rosie showed up, and I realized feeling is the only way back. Laya folded her legs on the floor beside him. I used to pretend someone would come for us, not because we were special, just because someone had to, like in books. Benjamin smiled faintly. Sometimes life copies books, and sometimes, Laya said softly, you have to write your own ending. They finished building the desk together, her small hands steady as she held the panels in place. That evening, the family gathered around the oak dining table, roasted chicken, green beans, Naomi's experimental lemon payotu tart, but eaten with laughter anyway. The lanterns glowed above them, the fireplace crackling. Naomi lifted her glass of sparkling juice. To those who show up, she said. When others leave. Benjamin didn't need to speak. He simply lifted his glass and met her gaze. After dinner, when the girls were tucked into bed, Benjamin joined Naomi on the back porch. The lake shimmered silver under the moonlight, stretching toward the horizon. Naomi leaned against the railing, arms folded. I keep thinking it will disappear, she admitted. That I'll wake up and it'll all be gone again. It's not going anywhere, Benjamin said. She turned to him, eyes searching. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. Her gaze softened. You're not just helping us. You're part of us now. Benjamin swallowed hard, the ache in his chest shifting into something gentler. I've never wanted to belong anywhere more. She rested her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that, silent, the night air wrapping around them like a promise. Later, as he read in his office, Laya peeked in, barefoot and hesitant. If Mom keeps getting better, she asked, and we don't need help anymore, will you still stay? Benjamin closed the book slowly. He rose, walking around the desk to kneel in front of her. I'm not here because you need me, Laya. I'm here because I want to be, and I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, she studied him with solemn eyes. Then she hugged him, tight and real, no hesitation. And in that embrace, Benjamin understood. This wasn't a chapter he was helping them close. It was one they were writing together. Weeks later, the backyard transformed beneath paper lanterns strung from the oak tree. Teresa arranged folding chairs, neighbors trickled in, and the girls staged a play they had written themselves, The Man Who Saved the Day. The story was Simpletwo Lost Girls, a cruel villain and a stranger who refused to walk away. The audience laughed, cried, applauded. Naomi wiped her eyes, her smile unshakable. When the curtain call ended, Rosie ran to Benjamin. Did we do good? You did perfect. That night, Naomi joined him on the porch again, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. She handed him one, her voice quiet. I never thought I could trust another man. Not fully, but here we are. I never thought I could love again, Benjamin admitted. Not after Maddie. His voice cracked. I thought that part of me had died with her. Naomi stepped closer, whispering. It didn't die. It was waiting for the right place to land. Benjamin reached into his pocket, fingers brushing velvet. I've thought about this 1,000 ways, Show. When, what words to say? He opened the box, revealing a simple ring. I thought I was done being a father, done being a husband. But I wasn't. I was waiting for the right family to find me. Naomi, I don't want to be someone who helped. I want to be someone who stays. Tears spilled from her eyes, but her smile was strong. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, yes. 2 weeks later, under the oak tree, Naomi walked down the aisle with Laya holding one hand and Rosie scattering petals at her feet. Benjamin stood waiting, eyes full of peace. Their vows were simple, trembling with tears but certain. Naomi whispered, You didn't just find us. You chose us. You stayed when you didn't have to. Benjamin answered, You taught me what comes after grief. That love doesn't die. It returns in another form. Afterward, they danced barefoot in the grass, laughter echoing across the lake. Rosie twirled until she collapsed in giggles. Laya leaned against Benjamin's side. Naomi stood watching, her hand pressed over her heart. As the sun dipped low, they walked together to the water's edge, hand in hand. Laya looked up, her voice soft but certain. I'm glad we ran away that day. Benjamin bent down, pressing her small hand in his. No, sweetheart. You didn't run away. You ran home. And this time no one would ever leave again. There are stories that live in the margins of the world, stories of children silenced, mothers erased, and systems too blind or too broken to care. But every so often, someone chooses to stop walking past. Someone chooses to listen. That choice can change everything. Benjamin Cross was a man who had already lost too much, a father who buried his only daughter, a leader who thought success could patch the hollow spaces in his chest. He believed he had nothing left to give until two trembling voices in a park begged him not to let the hurt happen again. In that instant, grief transformed into purpose. What followed was not just a fight for custody, or even for justice. It was a fight for truth in a world where lies are written in ink and stamped with authority. It was the resurrection of a mother's voice after years of silence. It was the healing of two little girls who learned that love had never abandoned them, not for a moment. And it was the rebirth of a man who discovered that even the deepest scars can make room for hope again. We live in a time when cruelty often wears the mask of respectability, when predators hide behind paperwork and polite smiles. But this story reminds us that courage is not loud. It is quiet and stubborn. It is the act of sitting in the corner booth of a diner, telling two frightened children, "You are safe now." It is walking into a courtroom not for power or profit, but to say, "I will not leave them behind." Naomi, Leah, Rosie, and Benjamin found their way back to each other. Against the odds, against the lies, against a system that tried to erase them, they built a home. Not perfect, not polished real. A place where drawings hang on the fridge, where laughter fills the air, where wounds begin to close and futures open wide. And in their story, there is a truth for all of us. Family is not just blood. It is choice. It is the decision to show up, to stay, to fight for those who cannot fight alone. If you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever feared you were too broken to be loved again, remember this healing is possible. Love can return in forms you never imagined. And sometimes, the people who save us are not the ones we expected, but the ones who refuse to let go. This is why we tell these stories, to remind ourselves that even in the darkest corners hope survives, that every silent lie can be shattered by truth spoken aloud. If this story has moved you, if it has reminded you of the power of listening, of protecting, of choosing love over fear, then stay with us. Join us, because there are more stories waiting, more truths that need to be told, more lives that can be changed. Subscribe now to Silent Lies and be part of the voices that will never let the silence win again.